Here is the question nobody in this community is asking correctly. They are asking, what does the Fed rate decision mean for XRP's price? That is the wrong question. That is the retail question. And as long as you are asking the retail question, you are going to arrive at the retail conclusion, which is that nothing significant happened today. But something significant did happen today. Jerome Powell stood at that podium for the last time as Federal Reserve Chair, and buried inside what he said, and more importantly, what he did not say, is a set of institutional facts that collapse the timeline on XRP's adoption runway in a way that the market has not yet priced. Today, I am going to walk you through what Powell's final press conference actually handed to Kevin Warsh, why the rate decision at 3.5 to 3.75% is quietly maximizing the commercial case for on-demand liquidity right now, and why May 15th is not just a calendar event, it is a structural handoff. The window between now and that handoff is one of the rarest setups this asset has ever produced. Welcome back. This channel does not trade on hype. We trade on structure. My name is Plan XRP Admin. We do not predict the future here. We read the architecture that is already being built. This is not financial advice. Do your own research. Consult a professional. Now, let's go to work. Let me start with the piece of today's news that every financial headline missed entirely. Powell confirmed he is staying on the Federal Reserve Board as a governor after his chairmanship ends on May 15th. He will sit at the same table as Warsh, with a vote that extends through 2028. Most people heard that and moved on. The XRP community heard that and celebrated the rate hold. Neither group paused to ask the right question, which is this: what does it mean for the payment system supervisory transition when the outgoing chair does not leave the room? Here is the answer. The Federal Reserve's payment system posture, the posture that governs whether distributed ledger settlement infrastructure can operate inside the supervised payment framework, whether Ripple's on-demand liquidity gets the institutional green light, whether the capital buffer mechanisms in the Digital Asset Clarity Act are implemented at full scope or minimum compliance. That posture has never been decided by one person. It is decided by a board. And as of May 15th, that board includes both the outgoing chair who has been measured, if not resistant, on payment system modernization, and the incoming chair whose published writings describe the existing correspondent banking system as built for a pre-digital era. Those are Warsh's own words from the Hoover Institution, not my interpretation. His words. This is the transition that matters for XRP. Not the rate story, not the inflation story, the payment system story. Think about what the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has been building with Project Cedar. Phase 1, sub-10-second cross-border settlement. Phase 2, multi-currency atomic settlement. Phase 3, documented interoperability with external distributed ledger settlement infrastructure. The Federal Reserve has been building the technical case for exactly the kind of payment system that XRP's ledger is designed to serve. They have done this research across multiple phases. They have published the findings. They have never once put the words XRP or Ripple in any of those publications. And yet the technical specifications in the published research describe a settlement architecture that is operationally compatible with what the XRP ledger does. You do not build 3 phases of research into something you intend to ignore. The research is done. The policy chair who is philosophically aligned with implementing it is arriving in 2 weeks. The outgoing chair, who may be more cautious, remains on the board, which means the transition moves carefully, but it moves. That is not a bearish signal. That is a signal that the implementation is deliberate and therefore durable. Now let's talk about what the rate hold actually does to the commercial math on XRP adoption, because this is where most of the community stops at the surface and misses the engine. The correspondent banking network runs on pre-funded Nostro accounts. These are currency accounts that banks park capital in across every country they need to move money through. Right now, globally, there is approximately $27 trillion locked in Nostro and Vostro accounts doing nothing except waiting to facilitate the next transfer. At 3.5 to 3.75%, a bank that holds $1 billion in Nostro accounts is carrying an opportunity cost north of $35 million a year. That is money that is not being deployed, not earning a return, not working. It is sitting in a vault in a foreign currency waiting for someone to make a cross-border payment. Ripple's on-demand liquidity does one thing at its commercial core. It eliminates the pre-funding requirement by sourcing the destination currency in real time through XRP. No Nostro account, no locked capital, no $35 million annual drag. Now here is the math that the crowd ignores. Cross-border payment flows are approximately $150 trillion annually. The Nostro Vostro system that supports those flows has $27 trillion locked at any given moment. At a blended return of 3.5%, that is $945 billion in annual opportunity cost sitting inside the correspondent banking system. Almost $1 trillion a year that could be freed if the pre-funding requirement went away. That is the commercial case for ODL, and that commercial case is at its mathematical strongest when rates are highest. Powell held at 3.5 to 3.75% at his final press conference. He did not give the market the cut it was looking for. 3 voting members, Hammack at Cleveland, Kashkari at Minneapolis, Logan at Dallas, did not even support an easing bias in the statement. The Fed is holding. Every month the Fed holds at this level is a month where the opportunity cost calculation for every bank evaluating an ODL deployment gets more expensive. The spreadsheet inside every treasury team at every correspondent bank in the world is getting harder to argue against. Not because of XRP's price, because of the Fed's rate. Powell, on his way out, handed XRP the most commercially compelling rate environment in its history. Here is what that means at the position level. At the current price, $1,000 buys you roughly 700 XRP. Standard Chartered's near-term target represents a near doubling. At $8, the level where Project Cedar compatibility moves from research into operational guidance, that same position is worth north of $5,600. At $28, Standard Chartered's documented institutional target, it is worth close to $20,000. That math is not a prediction. It is what the numbers produce if the thesis executes. Now let me show you what the institutions are doing, because their behavior is the clearest signal we have about what they believe is coming. Goldman Sachs built a $154 million XRP position during the Powell era. Think about that. They built it while the payment system's supervisory posture was at its most conservative. They did not wait for Warsh. They positioned before the transition because their analysis said the transition was arriving, and they wanted to own the asset before the policy environment caught up with the thesis. Goldman does not make a $154 million allocation to a speculative asset on hope. They made it on research. Their research said, the institutional adoption timeline for XRP's payment infrastructure role is compressing, and the price at which we can build this position today will not be available after the policy transition confirms the timeline. Bank of America has been filing patents in the categories that cover distributed ledger settlement integration with Federal Reserve capital adequacy frameworks. These are not broad exploratory filings. These are specific targeted filings in the categories that only have commercial value inside the supervised payment framework that Warsh's documented posture is designed to build. Patent filings are not marketing. Patent filings are how legal and technology teams protect the operational infrastructure they are planning to deploy. Bank of America is protecting infrastructure it intends to use. The infrastructure it is protecting integrates distributed ledger settlement with the Federal Reserve's regulatory framework. Fidelity has an XRP ETF application in review at the SEC under Paul Atkins. Atkins and Warsh represent the same administration's digital asset policy agenda applied to 2 different institutions. When the SEC and the Federal Reserve are simultaneously led by chairs who are philosophically and institutionally aligned on digital asset payment infrastructure, the regulatory environment for XRP is the most favorable it has ever been across every relevant dimension at the same time. Ask yourself this: does Fidelity file an ETF application for an asset it believes faces an adverse regulatory future? No. Fidelity files in anticipation of a regulatory future it has analyzed and found favorable. Today's press conference confirmed the leadership transition that makes that favorable future specific and dated. While retail investors are debating whether the rate hold is good or bad for the market, Goldman, Bank of America, and Fidelity are positioned, filing, and executing against a timeline that today's press conference just put a specific date on: May 15th, 2 weeks. Let me give you the specific event sequence that the next 30 days produce. May 15th is the first gate. Powell's chairmanship ends. Warsh assumes the chair pending his Senate floor vote. Watch when that floor vote is scheduled. The moment it is announced, every institution that has been holding a deployment decision pending the transition has a specific date to build its production timeline around. The first Warsh FOMC meeting is the second gate. Watch the language in his first press conference as chair. The shift from Powell's framework to Warsh's framework will be detectable in how he discusses payment system evolution, digital infrastructure, and the Federal Reserve's technology modernization posture. That language shift is the signal that the supervisory environment has officially changed. The Clarity Act floor vote is the third gate. The difference between a Clarity Act passed under Powell and a Clarity Act passed under Warsh is the implementation guidance that follows. Implementation guidance written by a Federal Reserve staff operating under a payment system modernization-aligned chair is commercially useful to deploying institutions in a way that guidance written under a more conservative posture would not be. The legislation is the same. The implementation environment is categorically different. The first Warsh-era Federal Reserve Payment System research publication is the fourth gate. When the Fed publishes its first payment system document under Warsh's authority, the direction of Project Cedar and the Fed's posture on distributed ledger settlement infrastructure becomes officially documented under the new chair. That documentation is what every institutional compliance department in the XRP adoption pipeline has been waiting for to move deployment decisions from planning to production. The window between now and those 4 gates is where the position is built or missed. The supply picture underneath all of this does not give the market room to absorb institutional deployment at today's prices. The effective liquid float in XRP is approximately 6 to 9 billion tokens once you account for escrow locks, institutional custody positions, ETF ecosystem reserves, ODL operational requirements, and sovereign accumulation. That is the supply that is actually available for the demand that is building. 5 simultaneous absorption mechanisms: ETF flows, institutional custody, ODL operational reserves, grayscale conversion activity, and sovereign accumulation have been contracting that float throughout the accumulation phase. Specific timelines convert planning decisions into deployment decisions. Today's press conference gave every institution in that pipeline a specific date: May 15th. Planning decisions becoming deployment decisions means capital that was parked at the threshold begins moving toward execution. That capital hits the contracted float. The float cannot grow to accommodate it. The supply is fixed at 100 billion, the liquid portion is already contracted, and the absorption mechanisms continue to operate. The only variable that adjusts is price. If you made it here, you already understand that this is not a trade. It is a position in a structural transition that has been building for 3 years and is completing in real time. Jerome Powell just gave his last press conference. Kevin Warsh advanced through the Senate Banking Committee today. The rate hold Powell leaves behind is inadvertently maximizing the commercial case for the technology Warsh is philosophically prepared to support. Project Cedar's research is finished. The Clarity Act is advancing. The institutional positions are built. The retail crowd is going to wake up to this after May 15th. The informed holders are sitting in it right now before the transition confirms what the architecture has been telegraphing for months. The question is never whether the system is being built. You can see it being built. The question is whether you recognize the structure before the crowd does. Today was the last press conference of the Powell era. For XRP, it was the opening bell of something else entirely. Stay patient, stay rational, stay positioned. Comment Warsh below if you made it to the end. I want to know who is actually paying attention. Knowledge is the only hedge. Stay sharp.